Welcome, everyone. Today we're telling a truly unsettling story that comes out of Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. It's a place that, certainly back in 2013, was known for danger. You have this awful mix of cartel violence, really deep corruption, police who often seemed indifferent, and just these outdated social views. All of it created this environment where horrific crimes, especially against women, could happen and just go unpunished. And in a city like that, where justice seems broken, maybe it's inevitable that someone feels they have to step in. Today we're going to tell you the chilling story of someone who did just that, a mysterious figure known only as Diana, hunter of bus drivers. We'll look at the shocking events of August 2013 that sent, well, not just fear, but some really complex questions through Juarez. So let's set the scene. It starts with this chilling precision. August 28th, 2013. It's early, about 7:45 a.m. A woman, seemingly alone, gets onto a bus. Then, without any warning, she pulls out a gun and shoots the driver. His name was Jose Carrera Herrera, 45 years old. He actually tried to get away, jumped off the moving bus, but he collapsed right there on the sidewalk. Died soon after. And the attacker, she just disappeared, walked away. Witnesses were left completely bewildered. Now, in Juarez at that time, as disturbing as it sounds, this might have felt almost like business as usual. A day without a murder was rare. And female assassins, while maybe not common, weren't exactly unheard of either. So the police, their first thought was, okay, this is probably a hit. Maybe extortion, maybe an unpaid debt, just, typical stuff for a city so tangled up in organized crime.
Right, and that assumption, that initial reaction from law enforcement, it really tells you something. It shows how deeply woven organized crime was into the fabric of Juarez. It wasn't just a background threat. It was often the first explanation, the lens through which everything was viewed. It suggests a real breakdown,
Exactly. But then, just the very next day, August 29th, things took a really extraordinary and much scarier turn. The same woman, or at least believed to be the same woman, gets on another bus. Unbelievably, it's the same bus route. This time, she rides for a few blocks and signals for a stop. Passengers said she walked up to the driver, a man named Freddy Morales, only 32. She says to him chillingly, "You guys think you're real bad, don't you?" Then pulls out a gun, shoots him twice in the head, kills him instantly. And just like before, she escapes on foot, vanishes. Witnesses couldn't offer much. A middle-aged woman, maybe blonde hair, maybe it was a wig. One time she was seen wearing like a cap, plaid shirt, jeans. But here's the crucial part. She didn't rob either driver, so theft wasn't the motive. That was clear straight away, which left everyone wondering why. Why bus drivers? Why this specific route? And then, just one day later, August 30th, the story shifts again. A local news website gets an email, and the email claims to be from the shooter herself. This is where she gets her name. The message was, well, it was powerful and incredibly personal. Signed, Diana, hunter of bus drivers. It started, "You think that because we are women we are weak," and that may be true, but only up to a point. And then it went on. "Even though we have nobody to defend us, and we have to work long hours until late into the night to earn a living for our families, we can no longer be silent in the face of these acts that enrage us." And then she gets specific, mentioning the maquila shifts. I mean, this is just the big factories, often foreign-owned U.S. companies near the border. A lot of women work there, often late.
Right, that's a key detail.
She writes, "We were victims of sexual violence from bus drivers working the maquila shifts here in Juarez. And although a lot of people know of the things we've suffered, nobody defends us nor does anything to protect us." And finally, her declaration. "That's why I am an instrument that will take revenge from many women. We are seen as weak, but in reality we are not. We are brave, and if we don't get respect, we'll earn that respect with our own hands. We, the women of Juarez, are strong."
Wow, that mention of the maquila shifts is just... It's so significant. It strongly suggests Diana herself, or maybe someone she knew very well, worked in those factories. Experienced that danger, that vulnerability firsthand. It wasn't abstract for her, it was lived reality. And the name she chose, Diana, it's loaded with meaning.
Oh yeah, tell us about that.
Well, Diana, in Roman mythology, she's the virgin goddess, protector of childbirth, fertility, the lower classes. But she's also the goddess of the hunt, guiding hunters. And there's another layer, too. Sometimes she's linked to crossroads, roadways, with this darker sort of connotation, like to guide to the underworld, ushering people to the afterlife.
Protector and avenger, almost.
Exactly. It adds this real depth to the identity she crafted. It's both protective and deeply vengeful.
And despite, the chance it could have been a hoax, most people, including the authorities, seem to believe the email was real. It just explained the specific targeting, right? Bus drivers on that route. And it gave this incredibly powerful, raw motive for the violence. It put a face, a chilling voice to the attacks. To really get why someone like Diana might emerge, you have to understand the larger picture in Juarez then. We hear about the murder rate, what a world's worst. But what often gets lost is the horror of femicide within those numbers, the targeted killing of women, often with extreme brutality and just impunity. The sheer amount of violence, sexual violence, aimed specifically at women in that city was staggering. The numbers alone are horrifying. Between 1993 and 2005, 370 young women and girls killed. Then in 2010, just a few years before Diana, it peaked again. 304 women and girls killed in that single year. And the way it happened was often the same brutal pattern. Victims, some just teenagers, 13 years old, sexually assaulted, tortured, killed, then just dumped out in the desert, shallow graves. And so many of these cases, tragically, just weren't investigated properly, or at all.
Yeah, that lack of investigation, that impunity, it's absolutely key here. It created this environment where attackers felt they could act without consequence, and it completely destroyed any trust women might have had in the police or the justice system. When Diana's email said no one was willing to protect the women of Juarez, sadly, that was devastatingly accurate. You heard stories constantly. Women reporting crimes only to be humiliated, disbelieved, turned away by police. Politicians, people in authority, would actually blame the victims, say they were sex workers, or it was their fault somehow. There was this former criminologist, Oscar Menes, who worked on many of these cases.
Right, I remember reading about him.
He said first they denied the problem, then they played it down, and finally they blamed the victims' lifestyle and their families. He actually resigned, saying his colleagues would rather cover up investigations and tamper with evidence than find justice.
That's just devastating. A complete betrayal.
It was a total breakdown of the system meant to protect people.
And it's important to add, while the overall murder rate in Juarez did drop quite a bit after 2010, by 2013, that was mostly thought to be because one cartel kind of took control, so there was less fighting between gangs.
Right, consolidation of power.
Yeah. But it didn't necessarily mean things got safer for women. Femicide didn't just stop. So even as the city was trying to maybe clean up its image, it was still incredibly dangerous for women living there. Which brings us back to Diana's choice. In this city, so dangerous for women, why target bus drivers specifically? Well, one factor seems to be opportunity. And a terrible history. Some bus routes, especially the ones taking maquila workers home late at night, they went out into these pretty desolate areas, out towards the desert. If someone was attacked out there, well, there was little chance of help or escape. There's this chilling quote from a young woman who lived there. She said, "I remember when I was in high school, I would hear a lot about it. My friends would say to me that if you're going on a route and there's no one there, take a pen with you with a point of facing outwards because you never know. It's been happening for years and years. Years and years." This fear wasn't new in 2013.
And there's another angle, too. There were strong suggestions, reports that some drivers were also involved in drug dealing, which points towards possible cartel connections. So, the thinking is, maybe the drivers weren't always acting alone in these assaults. They might identify victims, but others could be involved. And if cartels are involved, well, they have a known history of paying off police, which could easily explain why these crimes against women on the bus routes were so often ignored, just swept under the rug.
And historically, there's a direct link. Back in the 90s, early 2000s, over 100 women who rode buses in that same area just disappeared. Many were later found dead, assaulted, strangled, dumped outside the city, and the justices, almost non-existent. Only 2 drivers were ever charged in connection with those earlier disappearances. One confessed, a whole series of horrific crimes, killings, but then he claimed in court he'd been tortured into confessing.
Right.
He got 50 years, but then incredibly, he was released in 2005 when the torture claims were actually confirmed.
Wow.
And the second driver charged. He died in prison before he could even be sentenced. Conveniently, some might say.
Yeah, it just reeks of impunity at every level. Confessions thrown out, deaths preventing trial.
It's almost impossible to grasp that level of failure. No wonder people felt abandoned.
And this leads to a slightly confusing but important point about Diana's specific victims. While the pattern of driver involvement in some crimes seems pretty clear from the history, the 2 men Diana killed, Herrera and Morales, they weren't actually on record as being connected to any previous crimes.
Right, that's true.
But, and this is a big but in Juarez, given how rarely crimes were properly investigated or punished, you can't definitively say they're innocent either. The records being clean doesn't mean much in that context. What it really highlights is the collective suffering. Her actions were a response to a known, terrifying pattern of abuse, even if her specific targets weren't proven perpetrators themselves.
They were symbols.
Exactly. Symbols of a system that terrorized women, often starting right there on the bus.
And after that email, after those 2 killings, Diana just vanished. She was never heard from again. No more emails, no more similar attacks. It seems like she carried out her specific act of vengeance and then stopped. But the impact she had in those few days was immense, immediate. She put genuine fear into the bus drivers of Juarez. Reports said something like half the drivers on that route just stopped coming to work.
50%, yeah, that's huge.
And you heard these stories, maybe anecdotal, but drivers supposedly kept her sketch, the police sketch, pinned up in their buses. Some apparently refused to let women on if they looked too much like the description. One driver, Rodrigo, was quoted in September 2013 saying, "We are terrified, we're frightened of our own shadows." That fear was real. But then you contrast that with how many women in Juarez reacted. It wasn't fear necessarily, it was something else. Much more complicated, defiant even. You heard quotes like, "They must have done something terrible to her with the police doing nothing in a society that doesn't help." It's understandable that she took justice into her own hands.
A justification, almost.
Yeah. And another woman said, "If the killer really is a victim, I hope she doesn't get caught." That says so much about how desperate the situation was. People siding with a killer because they felt she represented the only justice available.
And what's really striking is, years later, we still have no idea who Diana was, or is. Her identity remains a complete mystery, which strongly suggests that if anyone in that community, particularly the women working in the maquilas, does know who she is, they're not talking. No one's willing to give her up.
The silence is powerful.
It really is. Her actions clearly left this lasting mark, shifting that balance of fear, at least for a while. The fact that she remains unknown speaks volumes about the community's feelings, perhaps sympathy, or at least understanding for what she did.
So that's the extraordinary and deeply disturbing story of Diana, hunter of bus drivers. It shines a light on those horrific conditions faced by women in Juarez, the systemic failures that left them so vulnerable, and the emergence of this figure who felt driven to deliver her own incredibly brutal form of justice. It really makes you grapple with those hard questions we mentioned at the start.
Absolutely. This story goes way beyond just, a standard true crime tale. It's this stark, unsettling look at what can happen when society's safeguards just completely collapse. When the institutions meant to protect people actually fail them, or worse, become part of the problem. It forces you, the listener, to think about really uncomfortable things. What does justice even mean when the system is broken? Can an act of vengeance ever be truly just? Or does it just underscore how deep the abandonment runs? And what kind of scars does that leave on a place like Juarez?
Heavy questions indeed. Thank you for joining us as we told this intense story today. It definitely leaves you with a lot to consider. Before you go, if you found this story compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel Horror Docs for more explorations in the darker side of human stories. Sharing it also helps others find us. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.